Hi, I'm Skylar, and today I want to talk about how people who are pursuing religious vocations go about seeking and using information in the course of their religious life and work. So, why is this important? Well, first of all, religion is a powerful social influence. I actually think of religion as one of the oldest and most enduring information technologies, and it's stuck around for so long because it fully engages how the human brain naturally works. Because we've got these three different biological information processing systems: the cognitive system, the affective or emotional system, and the sensory motor system. And religion is pretty good at getting these three different parts of the brain to sync up with each other. Also, information itself is pretty vital to how religion works. Religion uses specific informational texts, it involves complex social networks, and there's this overall flow of information that is structured through collective religious practice that gives the members of a religious community a shared system of communication and meaning making. And Van Bever here says that religion and information science are a natural fit for each other. They can complement and reinforce one another. If you look at the DIKW pyramid here, data, information, knowledge, and wisdom, religion is mostly concerned with the peak of that pyramid, with the highest forms of human wisdom, which tends not to really be a focus of most information science research. And Van Bever is like, we could easily fix this here if we just collaborated more with religion. So anyway, like Van Bever said, there's not a whole lot of literature out there about information behavior in religious contexts, and most of what does exist is pretty piecemeal, although a good chunk of it focuses on Christian ministers engaged in the task of sermon preparation. That was a recurring theme. But I tried to get a decent variety of religions and religious occupations represented here. So, the researchers tend to agree that all of these people's needs aren't really being served very well by traditional information services. Like, they tend to not use libraries a lot, although a lot of them have built up their own personal libraries. A lot of religious professionals tend to operate in informational small worlds, especially clergy, although this tended to be more true with people with either really conservative or really liberal theological beliefs. And it also varied with the kind of work they were using the information for, whether it was preaching, church administration, or what. And a lot of studies discussed how the internet has encouraged more open information seeking and more participatory dialogue, which has had the effect of making a lot of religious communities more democratic and less hierarchical. So, there were some unique issues faced by particular groups that I thought were interesting. For example, Catholic women often felt very self-conscious during the early stages of their process of discerning a call to religious life, because that is kind of a unique journey that they felt like other people wouldn't really be able to relate to. And they also tended to feel really intimidated by the prospect of actual face-to-face interaction with people who are already involved in the religious life that they were potentially interested in. And so these women tended to prefer anonymous ways of seeking information, like browsing websites and participating in online forums at first. However, they ultimately needed that face-to-face contact in order to ultimately decide whether this particular kind of religious life was right for them. So this was like a kind of tension they experienced. And then worship leaders tended to engage in an ongoing process of developing their own collections of music that they could refer to whenever they needed to choose music for a service. And they used a lot of different sources, and it was like, even when they weren't actively searching for music, they were always kind of on the lookout for it. Like, even if they happened to be listening to music that wasn't religious at all, that part of their brain would still be going, still trying to pick up worship music ideas from what they were listening to. They sometimes used local libraries, usually to get sheet music of a particular song that they would then use to create their own arrangement of that song. And also, there are various music databases out there that help them, but like the study said that there could be better ones. Like, it'd be nice if there was a database where they could search the full text lyrics of sheet music, because right now most sheet music gets uploaded as PDF image files, so you can't actually search any of the text on the page, and that's pretty annoying. And then the studies on non-Christian religious groups in other countries tended to not go as deeply into the theory of information behavior, although they talked about it a little, but they mostly just focused on the practical questions, such as what kinds of resources are these people using, and what additional resources would help them. And I found that kind of disappointed. I would have liked to see literature that went more in depth into these people's experiences of the whole information seeking process. But anyway, the study on Israeli rabbis basically looked at how rabbis from different branches of Judaism use the secular press and modern communication technologies, with the more Orthodox rabbis tending to not trust these sources as much. However, a lot of rabbis relied on the secular press for political news about what was going on with the state of Israel. They didn't rely on it so much for religious news. This study also mentioned online resources that rabbis could use for their work, like this database, which includes a lot of important Jewish texts, and also the opportunity to teach lessons through online shiurim. And then there were a couple of studies on ulama in a certain part of Nigeria, and they basically just needed more accessible online resources that fit better with the way they tended to phrase their search terms, and they needed more support in learning how to use online resources, and they mostly just needed more material and social support for their overall information infrastructure in general. And then I also personally interviewed a Unitarian Universalist minister for this project, and that was really interesting, especially since I'd found some studies that focused on the information behavior of a single individual member of the clergy, but they were all about men, and this minister was a woman, and her way of talking about her experiences was very different. She emphasized the emotional and embodied components of her personal spiritual practice as a way of bringing things from her subconscious to her conscious mind, and as a way of ordering her experience. I definitely noticed that she had the whole small world phenomenon going on, but it seemed like there were good reasons for that. Like it was to avoid information overload and anxiety, so that she could keep that sense of being rooted in her own experiences. She said that one of the biggest problems she faced in her ministry was whenever she felt disconnected from her own deep consciousness. But for keeping up with broader current events, she mostly just used her Facebook newsfeed plus the New York Times website. She said she liked the New York Times in particular because she found it the most trustworthy and affordable and accessible. And then how she came up with sermon topics was through her personal practices of writing and reading, occasionally from her pastoral care experiences or through asking colleagues for sermon ideas. And then once she had a topic, she would use Google to find more information or additional texts related to that topic that she could use for the service. And then for other work-related issues, she would either ask her colleagues from seminary for advice, or she would get help from an expert in the field of whatever kind of issue it was, if it was something that was more outside of ministry. And then I also asked her about how she discerned her calling and what that information-seeking process was like, and that was really interesting. So, we've got lots of potential directions for future research. There are a lot of factors that could potentially be shaping different people's information behavior that haven't really been studied a lot, like their educational background, cultural and socioeconomic background, and any different experiences of privilege versus marginalization that they might have. I think there should also be a greater diversity of religious work worlds covered in the literature, both in terms of vocation and in terms of religious culture or tradition. I really thought this whole idea of calling discernment as an information-seeking process was really interesting, and I think we should study that more across different kinds of vocations so we can compare and contrast them. And then one article talked about this idea of phenomenological information studies, which focuses on how religious texts and artifacts are perceived in the process of information seeking. And then there's also this idea of religious information literacy, which is about how religious communities themselves can provide opportunities for lifelong learning where people can learn how to the information literacy skills necessary to help them navigate the information worlds that will help them to more effectively participate in religious life. So now I want to talk about all this in the context of Brenda Dervin's theory of sensemaking, which she actually calls a meta-theory. But anyway, sensemaking basically sees an individual person's process of seeking and using information as being on a trajectory through time and space, through environments that are shaped by different material and social conditions, towards some goal that they're trying to reach. And this trajectory, this path, can be blocked whenever a person encounters a gap in their knowledge, when they're like, hey, I do not know how to get where I want to go from where I'm at right now. And so then they have to find a way to bridge this gap pretty much through trial and error. And this is basically how people make sense of their experiences as they figure out how to navigate the world over the course of their lives. So whereas the theory of information worlds describes the different information environments people operate in, sensemaking describes how an individual moves through those information environments and how that individual subjectively experiences those environments. So sensemaking is really great for studying the religious or spiritual dimensions of people's lives because it centers a person's subjective experience. It honors the emotional and sensory motor factors that influence how they think and behave. So again, we've got that idea of the whole brain being involved. Sensemaking also looks at how power dynamics shape and constrain a person's information-seeking process, which is really important to think about when we are looking at institutional religion, because you want to honor individual people's subjectivity and agency in how they choose to make sense of the world, but you also want to consider that they might be experiencing social pressure to think and behave in certain ways. I really like sensemaking as an overall theory because it doesn't look down on people who think differently than what's generally the accepted norm in academia. It lets people be the authority on their own experiences. I think this is really important from a cultural competency standpoint, and religion is a big part of culture. Although again, it's important to look at the power dynamics involved and to look at the ways in which religion and other institutional social structures serve to empower or disempower people. So, from all this, I pulled some recommendations for professional practice. Going along with what we said, I think it's really important to understand all the cultural and institutional factors that shape the kinds of information that are needed in religious vocations, while also recognizing that each individual will make sense of their own religious life and work in their own way. I also think it's important to get connected with any religious groups and organizations that might have particular influence in the communities you serve, because different religious communities have very different needs and different ways of operating. And so it's really important to build those personal relationships with them so you can really understand their needs. And then, like the quote from Van Beber said earlier, there's a lot of opportunity for information science to collaborate with religion on interdisciplinary research. And then we've talked about how better databases are always helpful, like for the ulama and the Christian worship leaders, and possibly for other groups. So if you're in a position to help develop these kinds of databases, that would be a great thing to do. And if not, you can just familiarize yourself with the religious databases that are currently out there and see what you can do to make those more accessible to the people who need them. That's all I've got for today. Thanks for watching.